At no time in recent memory have Americans heard more or thought more about the relationship between art and politics, art and criticism, art and life. There is much more behind this, I think, than mere furor of the kind raised by Mapplethorpe or even by Rushdie. It seems that imagery of all kinds is looming larger in our lives, and that new questions about the role of creativity in culture are being asked. In that sense, the debate and discussion over the future of the arts here during the past year reflected issues raised much more broadly and quite outside the context of resource allocation. Thus, it was a special pleasure when this year's commencement panel tendered me a very, very short list that included the director of the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art. No one has written more deeply or thoughtfully about those issues than Kirk Varnedoe. No one has spoken more impressively about them than he did at the Centennial panel a year ago. Since doing his doctoral thesis on Rodin at Stanford with Professor Al Elson, our speaker has produced a series of special exhibitions and writings that have helped to redefine the way we view various relationships between primitivism and modern expression, between science and art, between realism and abstraction, between self and other. Kirk Varnedoe was born in Savannah and graduated from Williams College. He stayed on at Williams for a year to instruct in art history and to coach football before coming to Stanford, where he received his master's and PhD degrees and taught for a year before moving to Columbia. He has held regular academic appointments there and at the Institute of Fine Arts in New York, in addition to his museum work. In 1984, he received a MacArthur Fellowship, which enabled him to write the important book, A Fine Disregard: What Makes Modern Art Modern. Other major works include books on Scandinavian painting, self-portraiture, and other subjects, as well as catalogs for the series of provocative and imaginative exhibitions he has developed over the past decade. I had heard of his exceptional ability as a teacher and had seen one of his exhibitions, so I was looking forward to our encounter. But even that good notice did not prepare me for the care he has invested in thinking about this occasion, nor for the extraordinary quality of mind or the sensitivity he has reflected in our several discussions about it. Few things will be more important to you in life after Stanford than your own relation to creative expression, which is so vital to the culture of which you are a part. And few people have more to say to you about that than our speaker. I could not wish for a better partner for my own last farewell to a group of Stanford graduates. Please welcome back a member of the family, Kirk Varnedoe.
Thank you very much, Don. As a speaker, I'd like to thank you for that introduction and for the honor this invitation does me. Personally, I'd like to thank you and Robin for the wonderful hospitality you've shown my wife and I since we've been here. And as a Stanford alumnus, I'd like to take this occasion to thank you for the great and wonderful things you've done for this university. Thank you. So, President Kennedy, members of the Board of Trustees, faculty of Stanford University, distinguished guests, family and friends, but above all, you folks in black out here, graduates, you're the ones I came to talk to. I work at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and this means that every morning I leave my home in the normal world of daylight and humdrum street life, and I enter another kind of world where traditional ideas of space are radically compressed or eliminated, where wild deformations of imaginative passion transform human faces into unnatural masks of anxiety and alienation, where time itself seems to be warped, where lost dreams of machine technology that date to the Russian Revolution collide with assemblages of old cans, spattered paint, and the displaced, chaotic detritus of our times. And then I get off the subway and go into the museum. This not so unreal description points up some serious questions that I should ask myself every day as I walk past homeless people in boxes on 53rd Street in Manhattan to enter what one critic called the Kremlin of modernism. Questions, to put it in the blandest terms, about the relation between art and life. Or put more topically, questions as to what a museum curator can tell you on an occasion such as this, when there are so many other pressing things to think about. What importance can the arts, and in this I would include all the visual, literary, and performing arts, what can they hold in the face of the problems you're going to confront in our society? Now, I swear I'm not raising that question here just to defend my own turf. I'm more out to address an aspect of your life, to speak for parts of you that may not be getting much attention, that operate perhaps only in dreams or in the silent, semi-intuitive guiding of your everyday choices. I mean your imagination and your curiosity, and I mean as well your openness to things that are bizarre or difficult. Now, up to now, that capacity has only been tested by an occasional roommate or people from Berkeley, but believe me, it will get sterner challenges in years to come. And I'm also after raising a larger and more public point about the relationship between those imaginative capacities in you and the similar parts of the people around you. A question about how you or any individual in the society is going to reconcile his or her beliefs, tastes, and tolerances with those of a lot of other people who've got very different and often very contrary beliefs, tastes, and tolerances. I want to talk to you about two principal things: why the question of the arts has come to be of pressing concern to the society now, and what your role might be as a receiver and as a giver in this dialogue. And then that will lead me back to a broader question about growth and change, about the education you'll carry away from here, and about the one you've yet to have. Now, there's a well-known story about the modern sculptor Alberto Giacometti, who is reported to have said if there were a fire in his studio, his first priority would be to save the cat. Now, clearly, in this common sense way, life is primary and art is secondary. It seems should be easy to make that kind of distinction between things that are necessary and given and those we merely invent. But it's not that easy, at least not anymore. We used to be much more confident about drawing distinctions between the things we could measure in the world out there and the ideas we concocted about them, or the representations we made of them. For much of this century, people staked a lot on their ability to isolate a class of hard facts and firm truths from the confusions of mere opinions or interpretations. Movements of dancers might be nice things, but the movements of atoms were basic, essential things, and that's what really counted. The pursuit of such rock-bottom certainties was the ideal of education, not just for their own sake, but because it was hoped that the more clearly we saw those truths, the closer we would all pull toward harmony and improvement. If the clarity and universality of science could be transferred into social affairs, so the argument went, we would resolve our mental muddles and get beyond our differing worldviews. Even if we all danced differently, the atoms danced only one way, and that should guide our steps. Now, those were far from unworthy ideals, but recent years have been hard on them. On the level of theory, that reassuring distinction between what's true and what's merely interpretive, between, say, particle physics and poetry, turns out to be damn near impossible to establish with any finality. Even within science itself, data and dogma, truth and conjecture have been shown to be so tied together there's no final way to separate them. And the attempt to transfer science's ideals of mastery and predictability to other parts of human life seems more and more to be a misuse of our intellectual energy. We're going to dance to the tunes we make for ourselves, regardless of how the atoms move. Similarly, in the world outside the classroom, many people hoped that a lot of humanity's problems would be solved by technology. Telecommunication, for example, was supposed to override national barriers and join us in one big global village. As it turns out, though, modern inventions can adapt equally well to liberating or to oppressive uses. Few can be cheered by the speed with which the Ayatollah was able to fax his death sentence against the author Salman Rushdie around the world. And in that way, instant communication can often just bring our differences into swifter collision, not returning us to the village, but empowering tribalisms of different and newly potent kinds. And the seeming hard evidence that technology gives us with such vivid immediacy, from the Zapruder film of Kennedy's assassination to the Rodney King video, has proved to engender irreducible doubt and disagreement, and to drive people apart rather than provide a universal touchstone. The more we see, the less we seem to know. Final facts turn out to be maddeningly elusive and hence impotent, but the ideas people concoct about them remain explosively powerful and irreducibly varied. Now, you may well guess where I'm headed here. I'm trying to suggest that you are entering a changed world where the relationship between life and art is going to be more problematic and more important. As the machine age, the century of hardware, draws to a close, it's the software, the contingent conditioning from language on up, that dominates our notion of what defines human activity. The ways people represent the world to themselves, what they like, their styles of seeing, more than what their genes or their jobs are, have become the key factors in our reckoning of social identities. This is in part what the contemporary philosopher Richard Rorty means when he argues that the twin models of science and philosophy, which shaped our aspirations for so long, are now being displaced by the twin models of politics and art. Pursuing permanent truth seems less critical than learning to negotiate with irreducible pluralism, and the imagination, as the source of other alternative worlds, seems closer to the center of the mind's most important, most determining work. And you of all communities should not doubt this. The debate over what artistic traditions, what canons of poetry or music or dance get taught at Stanford and other universities has been one very telling part of this shift. You don't see a similar heat being generated about what they're learning in the business school or over in engineering. Sorry, hate to take sides. If you need further close-to-hand proof of this, look to recent American politics, where support for the arts is close behind sexuality and reproductive rights as a symbolic battleground on which issues of our national purpose, our collective morality, and tolerance are being contested. I generally take it as a rule of thumb that anything that comes in as a close third behind existence and sex merits some attention. Now, in this changed environment, the familiar tension between individual freedom and collective identity has come to vest itself in debates about the rights and powers of the creative imagination, and it's pulled apart some old companion terms. Culture is now a positive, even better, a fundable term of entitlement and solidarity. The more cultures, the better. While art has become a four-letter word, suggestive of the dirty doings of some deviant elite. It has, in fact, become a very real and testy question what art as we know it has to do with culture as we would like it to be. How are your or my readings and dreamings, the different ways we dance, individually and by gender or ethnicity or sexual preference, going to mesh with others to form something we can all live with? Or put a little crudely, how will your private pleasures connect to your public responsibilities? There are, of course, even in the platitudes of commencement speeches, no neat one-line answers to these dilemmas. But we may be able to sneak up on them sidewise if you will let me suggest some of the things the arts can do for you as a person, and then worry out what that will mean for you as a citizen. You may want, for example, to draw on plays or novels, listening to music, being absorbed in poetry or pictures, to take you out of time, to establish worlds of the spirit that move apart from and more slowly than the inexorable march of your bodies and biology or the cyclical turn of the seasons, and that connect you to other minds in other ages and other places, to reassure yourselves of human continuity beyond mortality, and to make you feel less alone and less isolated. But this doesn't require that art be timeless and beyond debate. Egyptian paintings, African sculptures, Japanese gardens, Greek dramas, these and other works of art continue moving people in different societies over many centuries. That happens. It's a contingent fact of history. But it doesn't prove that there are permanent hierarchies of immutable, intrinsic greatness. To the contrary, these heritages involve a dialogue between the art itself and the creative power of changing audiences to reinterpret and give new, altered life to the stories and pictures and tunes they inherit. As in other parts of society, traditions assume their greatest power and their longest life, not when they demand only monolithic reverence, but when they allow for reinvention and growth. It's also true that you can and will look to the arts to plunge you more deeply into time, to provide innovations and surprises that arise more swiftly and unpredictably than the cycles of your lives or the turn of the seasons, that quicken your pulse and give you a keener sense of being alive, a heightened sense of the uniqueness and the particularity of your own moment in time. But this doesn't mean that the arts are useful to you only in as much as they are, in the buzzword of my Stanford days, relevant to the agendas of the day. As some wise soul once said, art doesn't imitate reality. One of the damn things is enough. A dance, a poem, a painting, a photograph is not a simple reflection, and neither the way such arts interpret experience nor the way we interpret them are a matter of pinning down some one right answer. People who want to find clear propaganda for one issue or another can get impatient with that kind of imprecision and misrepresent the power of art. Politicians right and left are both busy these days warning you that imagined worlds, from Mapplethorpe to Murphy Brown and from rap music to romantic poetry, will enslave your thoughts, determine your politics or morals, and guide your deeds in some specific way for good or evil. This ranges from bills to protect you from pornography to arguments that core curriculums will fatally determine your universe of identity and political allegiance. But art's strong suit is not delivering specific messages and inciting concrete deeds. Art may instead be at its most powerful and most uncomfortable for authoritarians of all stripes when it orchestrates perplexity, fails to conform to what you already know, and instead sends you away disoriented but newly attuned to experience in ways that are perhaps even more powerful because they are vague, rogue, and indeterminate. And if this is true for the arts in general, it's true in spades for the art of your own era. And now you certainly know where I'm headed, back to Manhattan and through those doors on 53rd Street, because there's some useful things to be learned in there. Lord knows the Museum of Modern Art houses its fair share of all eras of modernity in general. Flights of diluted trendiness, exaggerated claims to truth, obsessed fanaticism, and that's just me and the rest of the curators. But overall, in the lineage that unrolls in those galleries, from Cézanne and Van Gogh to the present, there's a remarkable idea. The radical idea that living with uncertainty and open-endedness, in fact embracing it, creating it when it wasn't wanted, could produce something sustaining, a culture of its own that would satisfy the soul and serve social life as well. The history of modern art, from Picasso's scrambled faces to Andy Warhol's soup cans and beyond, is a recurrent pattern of impertinent individual acts of imagination initiated with no supporting consensus, new languages of expression that had only the tiniest circle of initial understanding, but which produced the broadest conceivable changes in our way of looking at and thinking about the world and in the way we represent life to ourselves. The kind of art I'm talking about is often difficult and hard of access and thus by certain definitions elitist. But it is not exclusive in traditional senses. Modern art, in fact, began by negating the privileges of established education. It ignored traditional text, snubbed respected skills, and sidestepped familiar standards of quality. It required people to make judgments without the comforts of stable rules and categories, and to navigate in seas of uncertainty or even absurdity without a map and with no guarantees. The remarkable gamble offered here was that if we would abandon the security of tradition and stop looking for the utility of immediate purpose and just pay a different, unblinkered attention to the possibilities of the imagination, whole new worlds of feeling could be born, and they were. And embedded in this conception of art is the larger, wholly modern notion that as an individual, you don't establish your culture only by the accepting embrace of your given nation or race or heritage of tradition, but that individual acts of imagination, proposing worlds that have not yet been, can create their own new plural communities around them, and that these in turn can form a different kind of society. For the artists and for their audiences, that gamble required large leaps of faith and accepting a special kind of responsibility for unsecured judgment. Those efforts at maintaining an open situation were, and they still are for you, the price of admission to our age's most telling forms of expression. It will always require those investments if you are to learn from other people's imaginations. But this categorically does not mean that I am trying to scam you into throwing out what you know and into giving up on judging. It is precisely your own experience, the way you have built your life eclectically from parts and invented yourself by your choices, that best tells you how we can be discriminating without practicing discrimination, and how a plural world without fixed rules is not merely anarchy or mindless relativism. From the formation of your music collection, to your course selection, to your shifting circle of friends and on up, since you entered Stanford and likely before, you have constantly been living in multiple cultures, making evaluations in uncharted territory, constructing rule-bound worlds of flexible judgments from new givens. There is no firm line between these discernments and those that will lead you to separate meaning from trivia in the most challenging art of our time, or to respond to imaginative worlds as yet unthought. In this sense, the admission ticket is already well in your hands. The crucial move at the door of the museum, though, as at the portals of the university, is not just in, but back out again into larger society, changed. And the most important change in either case shouldn't only be a new load of facts or a new club of specialty knowledge, but an expanded sense of what learning itself is, not just amassing, but also searching, acquiring, and discarding in a constantly adjusted ratio. Art is a crucial testing ground here because it is one of the last refuges where knowing what you like is still accepted as an excuse for not knowing more. We tend to cherish our intuitive response to natural parts of life, like Giacometti's cat, and mistrust sophisticated special forms that we have to learn how to like Giacometti's sculpture. But in our lives, the dilemmas won't be as dramatically simplified as that of the burning building. And you should always find that the choice in that story is false. It's two poles. Your experience of life and your involvement with creative interpretations of life will always be interdependent. To choose the known and given over the inventive and strange, to suppose firm the barrier between what we are inside and what we have yet to learn, is simply to mistake prejudice for wisdom and to concede that we have stopped growing. One of art's crucial functions, personally and socially, is to propose new worlds different from the ones you know. And this is unsettling enough in itself. But perhaps even more crucially, and potentially more important still for society, art can make you pay attention to the things you take for granted, make what you think you know be strange to you, and thereby change your relation to life's actualities and its possibilities. Part of growth is to recognize the profound ways in which both your learned feelings for what at first seems alien and beyond you, and your transformed understanding of what has always been at your feet and all around you can become the most satisfying, intimate parts of your relation to the world, empower you and give you the greatest texture and depth to your life. Otherwise, you may remain deaf to the music that might resonate with you, blind to the forms that might become the touchstones of your personal vision, and pass through your life without living it. Learning is the bridge to these worlds unexplored, the continuity between who you were and who you will become. We learn to be ourselves, and this is in some ways the most paradoxical part of your lives. You have been told often enough that your education privileges you. Like it or not, today you are an elite. But you already understand from your experience how this can limit you. Knowing more, knowing specialized things, can narrow your spirit, make you inflexible, and divide you from others as certainly and steadily as it has already begun to separate you irretrievably from that youthful person you were when you came here such a short time ago. But however fraught and potentially stifling that process is, there is no going back to some imagined prior wholeness. The only way is forward, to grow in empathy by growing in experience, and thus to make your knowledge connect you to a wider world rather than enclose you. The only revenge for what education does to you, the only cure for it, is more of it and never ending. As a concluding word, then, I suggest you think of the formal education you've had so far and the diploma you're about to receive as being sort of like the seat of your pants. You can rest on it, you can just use it to cover your butt, but you use it best and most artfully when you fly by it. Happy landings.